everybody wants to talk about how AI will affect their jobs, their organizations, and their companies. A lot of the fallacies that emerge in those discussions come down to having the wrong framing. So if you have the wrong frame, you could be right within that wrong frame, but because the frame no longer applies, it is true but utterly useless. So it goes back to this point of playing by the rules but playing the wrong game. It's not going to help you win at the end of the day.
Welcome back to the Meg and Amy Show. Thank you so much for the support for our show. Please do like and subscribe and add comments. We would love to hear from you and what you'd like to see more of on the show. Today, we are interviewing Sangeet Choudary. Sangeet is a best-selling author, speaker, and business advisor. He just published a groundbreaking new book called Reshuffle, which Meg and I loved. The book asks the question, what if we've misunderstood the real power of AI, not as a tool for doing tasks faster, but as the missing mechanism for making complex systems finally work together? He has also advised CEOs at more than 40 Fortune 500 companies, as well as pre-IPO tech firms. He's currently a senior fellow at the University of California, Berkeley, and he's presented at leading global forums, including the G20 Summit, the World 50 Summit, and the World Economic Forum. All right, so Sangeet, you have mentioned to us that you collect stories from all kinds of places, from Schumacher's racing loss to containerization to Steph Curry's basketball prowess. Tell us about this habit of collecting stories without purpose.
Yeah, I think I just like to collect stories in general. I read very widely, and the practice of sort of collecting stories without knowing where you're going to use them, I think that's what helps me connect some of these unlikely stories. So there are some interesting examples of how I use that in my writing, using how analytics changed the way basketball is played to explain how AI could possibly reconfigure workflows, or looking at the story of containerization to talk about how technology changes economic systems. The example you took of Schumacher losing the Bahrain Grand Prix as an example of how AI native systems are fundamentally different from traditional systems. So the connection between the story and what I'm trying to illustrate is usually very far out, and the fact that I collect them without knowing when and how I'm going to use them, it sort of helps to make that random connection.
Yeah, well, I think it makes a huge difference. So I read your book, or rather I listened to your book, I should say. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. The book is Reshuffle.
Thank you.
And what makes it really accessible, I think, is the stories and the kind of the metaphors and the parallels that you draw with those stories, because they're pretty heady topics. It's a lot to take in. It's a lot of emotional labor. It's a lot of mental labor. And so weaving those stories in made a huge difference for me.
Yeah, one of the things I want to ask you, Sangeet, is so I also read a lot. And one of my challenges is I will have no trouble recalling a story or putting together a story, but I will have a ton of trouble keeping track of it all. Like, do you use any tools for that, or do you just have a great mental map that is easy for you to do the recall?
Yeah, so I have a tool that is actually very inefficient, and it's probably because it is so inefficient and you don't need to tag it and do tons of things with it, which is why it's kind of stuck. So it's called Workflowy, workflow with a Y. And even when Notion, Rome, all of these things started coming in, I could not move to them, even though they have much better bells and whistles. You can do a lot with them. Workflowy is just like think of it as a Word document where you can drag and drop bullet points around. And the reason that works for me is because I like to arrange things in hierarchies, and then you can move the entire hierarchy into something else because you made a new connection. And I've sort of collected everything that I've read over the past 15 years in that Workflowy.
Yeah, you found a tool that matched your brain, I guess.
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Meg has a similar a similar capability, except instead of collecting stories, she collects memes and concepts. And like whenever we're talking about anything, she grabs the meme and you know, she's always got a meme for whatever topic.
Or a random video clip of some B-level movie.
Right.
Yeah, that's my superpower.
It's a little scary. So we haven't found a tool that looks like Meg's brain, which I'm kind of thankful for.
Probably a good thing, yeah.
So obviously you have recently published this amazing new book, but that's not your first one. And in 2015, you were focused very much on platforms as strategic levers. And we have learned about you and gotten to know you through this reshuffle period. We would love for you to walk through how your platform thinking evolved. What made you realize that AI transformation required a completely different framework from what you were thinking before?
The question that has sort of always fascinated me is, what separates winners from losers? Everybody tries to answer the question using whatever narrative sounds convenient. And one thing that I saw, which was fairly consistent across the board because of, especially post-2000 when, digital happened and when business models started changing very rapidly, one thing that I saw as a fairly consistent thread across all stories of companies losing versus companies winning was that the losers were typically doing all the right things but in the wrong frame. So they were playing by the rules, but they were playing the wrong game. And the winners were fundamentally changing the game, right? So whether it's Kodak versus Instagram or Netflix versus Blockbuster or TomTom versus Google Maps, like there are tons of these examples. There are many different ways you could explain them, but what really kind of explains all of them is this idea of playing the wrong game with the right tools, which means that you can't just win by doing better. You have to win by reimagining, by doing different, by rethinking what the new rules of competition are. And so the idea of platform revolution and my whole work on platforms started over there because a lot of discussion about what's changing with digital was explained in bits and pieces. We're going from offline to online, but then a lot of puzzles could not be explained by that, so that was not really it. Some said that we're going from bits to atoms. That again did not make sense. It had corner cases. So I used the pipelines to platforms distinction, traditional linear business models versus new network business models as a way to explain how the old game was different. So even if you play it well, you're not necessarily going to win because the game itself has changed. And I think the same thing is happening with AI today because, and that's really what got me to writing Reshuffle, because I was entering too many rooms over the last several years where people were just looking at the impact of AI with the wrong lens and stopping with, well, is AI going to take my job, or it's going to make me better at my job? Is it going to make us more productive, or is it just hyped up? And all of those questions were sort of missing the really important question of what's the new game and that AI brings, and how can I play to win it better? What are the new rules? And that's why I wrote Reshuffle. And that thread sort of continues through my work. My next book, which is titled Unfair Advantage, is again about a broader thesis about the fact that we're moving away from what we used to think of as operational uncertainty to a world where we are encountering structural uncertainty. So operational uncertainty means your things are uncertain within an existing structure, and structural uncertainty means that the structure itself is up for grabs. It's up to you to change it in your favor. And so that's been sort of the continuing theme across all of my work, and that's where Reshuffle comes in.
What's an example of operational uncertainty versus structural uncertainty?
Take the case of Kodak versus Instagram, right? Kodak was, one of the most common mistakes that people make, or one of the most common assumptions that people have is that Kodak lost out on digital. Even though it did invent the digital camera, it went bankrupt because it was a slow incumbent and because it was culturally slow to move forward, etc. What a lot of them failed to realize is that as of 2006, 5 years before it went bankrupt, Kodak was the number one digital camera manufacturer and seller in the US. And it had also successfully moved from its traditional business of prints and printing services, using film, to doing the same printing services for digital photos. So it was making good money with printing services on digital photos. All of that was working fine till in 2007, the need for printing completely went away, because for the first time you had a phone, the iPhone, whose display was so good that you did not need to print the photo in order to see it, to enjoy it. You could just see it right there on the phone. And the fact that you could see the photo right there on the phone meant that you could share it with somebody and they could see it on their phone. And so naturally, value moved away from printing to sharing. And that's where Instagram came in, make the photo look beautiful, share that further. And then Instagram, once acquired by Facebook, the monetizable asset moved to attention. So that's an example where the structure of where value sits and what the photography industry, or what's the industry around the central unit of a photo, that completely changed. So the structure of the industry completely changed, and with that, the rules of competition, the logic of where value can be made, what's valuable, completely changed.
What I love about your writing, Sangeet, isn't just that you're exploring questions we're all asking, which of course is a big part of it, right? What to do in this world where things are changing, but you also get ahead of it with a way to recognize how to deconstruct where the value creation is, and also help people think more holistically about advantage in this era. So I know you mentioned like trying to help people recognize the difference between winners and losers and not get stuck in the thinking that got them to their current state. I'm just curious, that ability to not just connect the dots, but to bring forward stories, is that something that you developed over time, or is this something that you kind of always had the seeds of this in your toolkit?
I think I've always enjoyed connecting the dots. The thing is that the more you look at things, the more your perspective develops, the more you understand corner cases, the more dots you start seeing which you did not see in the past. And so I think it's a lifelong journey to keep seeing new dots. So it's not so much, I guess the ability to make connections to some extent has always been there, but as I've progressed, I've seen more dots and developed more nuance around which dots matter versus which ones don't, and hence are worth connecting. The story part of it is something that I've actively worked on. My first ever book, a book called Platform Scale, is completely devoid of stories. It's very good for a practitioner who wants to, build something and keep it open on the side, to know how to build something. But it's not it's not the fun audiobook that you want to listen to on a road trip. So this whole idea of meshing stories, I think it became even more important when writing Reshuffle, because when I was writing it, I thought I was taking a risk with doing two things. The first four words of the book are why unintelligent AI matters. So I was shifting the focus away from AI's intelligence and whether you have a PhD in your pocket or 10 PhDs in your pocket, to this idea of let's think about how technology changes systems, even if it's not intelligent. And that has nothing to do with the technology. It has to do more with how the system works around it. So taking that, taking readers on that journey to completely start seeing things in a fundamentally new way. If I just used the word system and then started bringing in a lot of system science and complexity theory and all of that in, I would have lost them. And so that's the reason I worked a lot on getting the stories right, and that's sort of what you see in the book. That's also why I enjoyed writing it, because it's one thing to say I've got this idea and I'm going to put it out there, but you really enjoy writing it when you start seeing fundamentally new connections yourself while in the process of writing. And so seeing those stories, kind of bringing all of it to life. I'll just give one example. There was one point I wanted to make right in the first chapter, which was that you don't evaluate the impact of technology by its impact on a component. It's about how the component fits into the larger system. And I was really struggling to make this interesting until a story sort of struck me, which seems very unconnected, but is connected in a way, of how Tom Brady was drafted, I think 199th. And he a lot of teams passed him by, and then he ended up becoming one of the most successful, if not the most successful quarterback in history. And so this whole thing of, connecting that story, that it was not about the right talent. That is what all NFL teams optimize for. It was about the talent in the right system, and that's the component in the right system. It's a human story. It's an associative. It's something you can associate with, something you can relate to if you ever worked in a team. And so then you take that and you apply that to AI in a system like an organization or an ecosystem. It becomes relatable. So that's the reason I really wanted to invest in the storytelling side of things.
All right, so we've been pondering this really big question on the show for a while, Sangeet, and so we're hoping you can help us through this. And it's about whether legacy companies can actually transform themselves through AI, or if it's just fundamentally about new entrants disrupting the system. We've worked for big incumbent like software companies and that sort of thing, and obviously we've had lots of customers that were big incumbent companies, so we're hoping there's a way forward for them, but it's obviously super early days. What do you think? I mean, is this, are you seeing points of light? Are you seeing a way forward?
I think that the separation or the distinction or the gap is not necessarily just between the incumbents and the startups. It's between those who understand that they need to really reimagine their business model and the way they compete on the basis of AI, versus those who just see it as a way to speed up certain parts of what they do. And to the extent that the large players see the latter, you do see examples of pharmaceutical companies that have used AI very, in very interesting ways to dramatically reduce the risk associated with drug discovery and health, or the amount of wasted effort associated with it. So it's really about companies who see where AI can have maximum leverage, and then with that, start thinking about how they redesign their business model around that leverage point. And I think part of the challenge today is that because there's so much hype about what AI can or cannot do, in my experience at least, most people are just trying to separate the hype from reality, and until you actually get that sorted, it's difficult for you to start making big bets on your business around a new technology. So that's the real separation that I see, rather than so much of an incumbent versus startup. Although there are companies that have emerged around this time, which are more oriented around the technology than the traditional incumbents. So there's some distinction there, but it's really comes down to a mindset of how you think about where the advantage is with AI.
One of the things that you wrote about is how people tend to fixate on things that are true but not helpful to them finding their way forward.
Right.
And I loved your phrase, curiosity anesthesia, because of course, I've believed for a long time that in this type of a shift, curiosity is exactly what we need more of. So people balancing that fear with reducing curiosity is actually them creating the context for which they will fail. Tell me more about how you discovered this sort of maxim of true but useless, and maybe give a few examples of ways that we are using this AI moment to focus on the wrong things, whether it's bike shedding and talking about trivial things, or rationalization for continuing to do what we do. Tell me more about that.
Looking for the inside scoop on payroll? Whether you're a payroll pro or just curious about your paycheck, we've got two podcasts you cannot miss. It's About Payroll delivers the latest trends for payroll pros, and It's About Your Paycheck is here for employees, breaking down pay and rights in simple terms. Two great shows, two great hosts, and endless insights to keep you informed and empowered. Subscribe now and elevate your payroll knowledge. Brought to you by Work Defined, where payroll meets people.
Yeah, this phrase, true but utterly useless. It sort of came up during the course of dinner conversations, I think one of the things that really wears me down is you're going out for a social dinner with friends from all kinds of backgrounds. You want to have a good time, but everybody wants to talk about AI. And so at the end of at the end,
friends.
yeah, I needed to rethink my friend circle. But anyway, what happens at the end was I think I did not do what was socially appropriate on a few occasions, and I just kind of left the conversation at the point where I said that all of the things that you guys are saying are true, but they're not really helpful. Because it's not really helping you predict anything. It's not really helping you understand what has to change. So clearly, the frame in which these discussions are happening is not right. And so it's a range of all of these discussions, whether in boardrooms or at dinner conversations, that kind of helped me zero in on the fact that everybody wants to talk about how AI will affect their jobs, their organizations, and their companies. But a lot of the fallacies that emerge in those discussions, and I wrote a big post on, AI won't take your job, but someone using AI will, and the many fallacies with that. And there are many other, examples of this sort. All of these come down to having the wrong framing. So if you have the wrong frame, you could be right within that wrong frame, but because the frame no longer applies, it is true but utterly useless. So it goes back to this point of playing by the rules but playing the wrong game. It's not going to help you win at the end of the day. And I think the key point when we think about any moment of uncertainty, but especially any moment of structural uncertainty as we confront with AI right now, is that we need to really stress test our frames. We need to really stress test the underlying assumptions on the basis of which we are operating. So one of the assumptions that on the basis of which we are operating today, for instance, is that our jobs are about our tasks and the tasks that we do. And that kind of comes up because, a painter paints, a teacher teaches, and a plumber plumps, and so on. But if you really unpack things a little bit more, and I take the example of the typists in the book, where I say that you would think that the typist's job is about typing, but actually that's not what the job was about. The job was about the fact that before the word processor came, their job was to manage the cost of edits and manage the cost of bad mistakes or bad typing, or any mistakes that emerged in that process. And because the cost of editing was so high, the job was required to manage that, and hence you needed to be a really good typist in that era. But once the word processor removed that cost, anybody could type. So it's not that technology took away the task. The task still remains, humans perform it, but the job does not remain anymore. And so that sort of, things of that sort help you see that it's not that jobs are made of tasks and hence AI comes and automates or augments it. There's a much bigger shift that happens. So these are the types of issues that I wanted to kind of address with this point about true but utterly useless.
Yeah, I thought that was a big aha moment for me, that jobs are made up of tasks and constraints, right? So and to just think about the tasks and the task workflow is not sufficient. You have to really have all of the constraints and the coordination costs and understand where they are now, and then how they're changing, and then how to optimize accordingly. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah, that was actually one of the one of those things that I got into the book. I did not validate it extensively with people to get their reactions. I was not sure how it would be received until it was read. I knew it was theoretically right from a systems perspective, but until you actually get people to read it and respond to it, you're not really sure. And that's why, again, I used a lot of stories over there to illustrate that, so that people got their head around what these, why constraints were important and why it was not just tasks.
Well, and I love your point about stress testing the frames. I think another point that you brought forward that really meant a lot to me was the idea of understanding which parts of the business have the leverage for a competitive opportunity,
right,
and which part of the system maybe don't, and how people tend to do that mental math based on the past business model. So if you just don't understand the new opportunity, the way to create that new system, you're going to keep coming to, the solutions that you had in the past. But when you start to understand that maybe there's a chance for decoupling the value capture, you get to a new math of where you should be investing versus where you should maybe keep it status quo. It doesn't mean everything changes in the tasks or the work, but it does mean that new points of leverage emerge. And if you're not asking those questions, you're not going to find them. So give us a few more examples for our listeners about how they can concretely stress test their own frames and where they should take note of the changes, because right now there's just like so much going on. I think it's really hard for most people to see past the systems that they exist in today.
That's really the central question today, right? How do you spot how the system is changing? How do you spot where value is going to sit in the future, where power is going to sit? One of the key things that I like to think about is this idea of strategic commoditization. So it sounds like two big words, but it's basically just simply this, that you change the logic of the industry by commoditizing what was previously valuable, which means that everybody who's now playing the old game is suddenly competing for scraps. And you do it in a way where you can move the value to another part of the industry, or you rewrite the structures of the industry or the boundaries of the industry, and so you move it to another point where you have set up a nice net to capture it, right? And there are many examples where strategic commoditization has played out very well. I mean, one of the examples that all of us understand and associate with is GPS becoming a consumer utility, and then personal navigation devices like TomTom coming out as a result. And all the way up till the iPhone came out, TomTom was doing very well. A lot of people feel that the iPhone killed TomTom because it bundled navigation into the device. That's not really what happened. TomTom was initially the most used navigation device on the iPhone. What killed TomTom was that there was a competitor who could afford to give away navigation data for free despite the expensive or really high cost of collecting that data. And that was Google, because Google could commoditize strategically navigation data, because with that, there was a reason for it to have leverage in the whole mobile phone ecosystem. It had leverage over Apple because of that. It had leverage over its own partners. If you did not follow Google's directives as Samsung or LG, you would not have access to Google Maps, plain and simple. And so location-based services, navigation would not work on your phone. So Google realized the strategic importance of this new leverage point on a device that was always on you, and hence navigation was very central to using that device. And there are many other examples. If you just take the story of the iPhone and Android a little further, the iPhone and Android upended the telco industry globally, and carriers went into loss-making businesses. And for a long time, there was no way to find a way around it. And then WhatsApp came, and the one way that carriers could make money, telcos could make money, which was with SMS, went away as well. But there's something really interesting that happened in India, where a company called Reliance Jio, they essentially invested $40 billion in creating 4G infrastructure before anybody else did. And with that infrastructure, they provided essentially data for free. So data services were free on an $8 to $10 phone, and they launched this phone, got to 400 million users in a very short period of time, 3 to 4 years. And they did that because they commoditized where everybody else was making money, which was in the data services. And they could do that because, unlike 3G and 4G, and they offered voice for free as well, because in 4G, voice could be done over data packets. And so they commoditized both voice and data, offered all of it for free, and then started making money on services, because with 400 million people getting into their walled garden, they could sell services. And then they had Facebook, Amazon, everybody scrambling to invest in them. But these two are examples of strategic commoditization. The reason I'm taking this example, and strategic commoditization is just one lever which is extremely powerful in rewiring the system. So the reason I'm taking this example is think about how money and where money is made today. Think about why money is made over there and on what basis. And try to think about, reimagine it by saying, what if that was a complete commodity? Where would money move next? Because that's what's happening to our jobs today. Our jobs are structured around scarcity of skills. And with AI, some of those skills and performance of some of those tasks associated with those jobs get commoditized. So you have to think about, before something else commoditizes me, how can I strategically commoditize and find a fundamentally new business model around where I can move value? That's really the way you operate in a period of structural uncertainty. You use the uncertainty to rewrite the game in your favor.
So we're working on an AI transformation maturity model, Sangeet, and certainly at the top of the maturity model and where companies need to get to is that full reinvention, new framing, et cetera, all of the things that you're talking about. But most companies aren't, or organizations aren't equipped to actually tackle reinvention. And so, we see it, it's a lot more accessible to start with task optimization and getting people curious through pilots and that sort of thing. But of course, there is the potential downfall of, distracting and wasting time and resources, as well as people thinking that they're actually doing more than they are.
Yeah.
So we have a thesis that it is a useful step as long as you keep, the end goal in mind. But I'm curious, in terms of your thoughts around, what are the things that, companies that aren't really ready for that reinvention part, what can they be doing in the early maturity levels to get there?
So I would, there are three things that come to mind as you were talking about this. So the first thing, as you mentioned, is that you need to have clarity on where you're headed, right? Otherwise, it's a bit like you're training to run, but you haven't really thought through what kind of race you're preparing for, or you're just trying to be fit and you've not really thought of which sport you're going to play, right? Which is even broader than just running. So is fitness necessary to playing most sports? Yes, but is it sufficient? No. You need to know how to compete. You need to know how to create those leverage points in that new sport and so on, right? So I think the first answer to your question is that yes, it's necessary, but it's like a really thin initial layer of necessary before you actually even get to what is sufficient, right? The second piece, and this is where I feel most organizations, and to a large extent, a lot of this obsession with agile, which to a large extent really addresses operational uncertainty. It creates operational agility. It does not create structural agility. It does not help you reimagine the game. Extreme obsessiveness on learning, iterating, can actually hold you back from really thinking about what the future system and structure is going to look like. So my point is that while you need to be operationally agile, you also need to figure out what it means to be structurally agile. How can you identify new opportunities? How can you identify new leverage points? How can you identify what the new boundaries of your industry should be based on what's happening and what's available and what's possible? And the third point that sort of comes to mind is that a learning organization is very important, whether you have AI or not. Just the pace of change and with the lack of traditional resource-based lock-ins, a learning organization is very important. But you also need what I would call a locking organization. You need to learn and you need to lock it so that nobody else can take away that learning and commoditize it by the fact that it becomes available across the industry. And so what that really means is that you have to keep learning, but you have to keep thinking about at every point, how do we convert it into a leverage point that cannot just be taken away? So you need to have that constant learn and lock cycle. If you're only a learning organization and you're not locking any of it as proprietary capabilities on the basis of which you'll now compete, then it does not really help. The challenge with getting onto AI pilots, AI tools, is that a lot of it can be very helpful in learning without any locking. So you need to be just very careful about how do you create proprietary advantage, even in small capabilities, as you run these pilots.
Do you have any examples of learn and lock in?
I think my key point over here is that you need to ensure that there are ways in which whatever you are learning, you're able to create something that is proprietary to you internally. So what that means is you might be using a lot of third-party AI tools, and you might be, learning a lot about how to use those tools to make things faster, but then so is everybody else. And so is the tool in itself, for that matter. And the tool is gradually absorbing all of that, and a lot of things that you're creating on top, which might be really thin wrappers, internally, organizationally, thin capabilities on top of existing AI capabilities might gradually get absorbed into the tools. So you need to really think through what capabilities can you create that does not easily get absorbed, that is unique and proprietary to your organization. That is when it becomes powerful.
So that locking concept, traditionally think about that as competitive moats, and building a moat that is, tips the advantage in your favor. The role of a board is to help articulate strategy. And I think that this is an interesting moment for boards who have probably built most of their strategy muscle in these old platforms and these old competitive foundations. When you think about how to help boards really ask those challenging questions about competition and moats and, value capture and differentiation, and how to think about capital allocation towards a new strategy versus just, phoning it in or doing a percentage over last year for how you did budgeting, et cetera. Have you observed any boards doing a great job in this? And do they usually bring in external strategists to help them figure this out? Or are there models within the board makeup that give them an advantage to thinking about and understanding how to build new models in this new opportunity? What is your advice to boards, I guess, is the core question.
I think you're absolutely right in the sense that a lot of the brain power in boards today was trained in another era. Having said that, at a certain level, they understand. Most people that I talk to in these settings, they understand that you cannot just operate with the same old frames as you did before, so you need to change that frame, right? The hesitation happens at two levels. The hesitation happens if somebody comes in with a frame and is way too confident about the frame. There's a strong narrative about why the other frame is wrong. The hesitation happens over there because ultimately you're making a capital allocation decision. So you need to be very sure about the fact that if you're believing in a frame, you're allocating capital according to the frame, then that is right. So how do you plan towards that? So I think one way to manage that problem is to think about creating what I would call structural optionality, which means that you create optionality towards multiple structures of the future. So it's not just multiple future end states, but multiple different structures, in the sense that here's a possible end state, and in this end state, we would be in this business. So you could have multiple futures where in all those futures you're in the same business, and the futures are different because the environment is different. But a structural optionality would be one where you would rethink your business in each and every end state, and then see your investments today, how ineffective do they become in some of those, if some of those play out. So you want to make safe investments which maximize or which remain relevant across as many end states as possible. So that's the key idea that I would say when you've understood that you have to reframe, you need to think about creating these structural options, and then really investing across those different end states. And at the same time, I would say that boards also understand that the traditional competitive moats are going away. There's been a lot of talk about end of competitive advantage. We are in a world of fleeting advantages. And one of the stories again that I really like over here is there's a particular race car. I'm forgetting the exact model, but I think it's Porsche 911 if I'm not mistaken. But there's a particular race car which the traditional logic of the sports cars. The traditional logic of the sports car industry is that you compete on the basis of new looks. So it's very, very fashion driven. What's the new look? And so for every new look, you sort of market new cars based on the new look. Now, this particular car has not changed its look for the last 40 years or so. And what that has allowed it to do is that it's able to focus all of its capital into constantly improving its engine. Now, the Michael Schumacher example that I give in the book is that, whether it's an F1 race car or whether it's a regular sports car, the horsepower advantage translating to the car comes when the car is built around the engine. But if you keep on changing and competing on the basis of, or differentiating yourself on the basis of the look, you can't always optimize it to work with the capabilities of the engine that you've built. Because these guys have focused on keeping the look the same, they fully invest in improving the engine underneath so that every new generation of the car that comes out, every new model of the car that comes out, it looks the same, but it is always better performing than the previous one. And so the point that I'm trying to make is that they've operated in an industry which is structurally an industry of fleeting advantages. There are no moats because cars go out of style. But because they've stopped competing on design and they have decided to start competing on the engine, they've always ensured that customers get a better performing car as they move forward. So the point that I'm trying to make is that even with, you could do all of these, here are all the different futures and the different options that we are generating, and here are the least risky investment that we're making towards them. The most effective bet is actually not just to keep hedging, but to rethink how do you restructure the logic of your industry so that all your investments are actually risk-free. That's what happened with the decision of not changing the design of this car that this company made. So those are things that I would really look at. How do you think about these games fundamentally differently from how they are played today? I think that's the most important thing.
And being willing to be different than everybody else, even though there's a lot of pressure to follow the trend. So, yeah, I think that's a really good insight.
Yeah, and being willing to be different in a way that is not PR worthy, right? Because everybody wants to be different in a way that's PR worthy. They want to talk about what they're doing, which is fundamentally new, but that might just be the next sports car design, and it's actually making the new sports car less performant than the previous one. So that piece is really important.
So Sangeet, we've referred to the concept of coordination costs a couple times, I think, but I think it's worth just giving everyone a bit of a primer on this because it's such an important piece and how you see it as the hidden lever that most people miss. Can you describe a little bit about coordination costs?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the key arguments that I make in my book Reshuffle is that we often think of AI as a mechanism of automation. So we look at tasks and we see AI as a way of automating those tasks. But the real impact of AI comes in when we redesign the system, and the system gets redesigned when the way its various parts are coordinated fundamentally change. And that is the argument that I make around why unintelligent AI matters. I take the example of the container. When the shipping container came out, global shipping before that used to be based on the logic of break bulk cargo, which meant that cargo was shaped in different ways and was manually loaded on and off the ship. And so shipping times were unreliable. When the shipping container came, the unit of cargo became standardized, and so ports could be automated because cranes could now lift cargo up and down. But that was not the real benefit of the shipping container. Port automation was a first-order benefit. The real benefit of the shipping container was the coordination benefit, which was when ships, trucks, and trains coordinated on a single side of the container. which allowed containers to move from any point to any point in the world across these 3 different modes of transport without any delay in those handoffs. And that's the idea of coordination cost, because before that, even if you had a container, the size of how the trucks were built or the trains were built, and hence the containers that could fit on them were built, were not necessarily following a common standard. Only when they followed a common standard, that's when shipping became reliable, and with that, a whole range of interesting things happened. Global manufacturing got unbundled. You could manufacture anywhere in the world. So component-based competition happened. Globalization happened. Global supply chains came up. And the key point is that one single small technology like the shipping container changed the entire global economic system, because it changed the coordination cost, and it changed all the business activities that were structured around managing that coordination cost. Now today, we see coordination costs in many different ways play out in knowledge work, because a lot of knowledge work is tacit, stays in our head, is recorded on a phone call lying somewhere, nobody's checking that, is thrown around in email chains. But what AI helps us do is what the shipping container did by solving the coordination problem, and hence rewiring all the workflows, the entire system that was structured around that coordination cost. The same thing can happen with AI today, where if you can manage your organizational knowledge and serve that knowledge into the right workflows using AI, you have the ability to effectively manage that coordination cost, which to a large extent today is not effectively managed, or leads to what I call the coordination tax: too many meetings, too much getting on the same page. So the way organizations work can fundamentally change if AI can be used to better coordinate across teams and just better coordinate the right knowledge into the right workflow, so the right decisions are made and the right actions are executed. But more importantly, coordination can also be done between firms across an industry. And the reason AI is especially interesting over here is because AI today, at least, can take unstructured information and generate structured, visible representations of knowledge about a particular space. And once that is created, multiple stakeholders can operate around that and make, coordinate their actions around that. And I think that's the real value that is waiting to be unlocked with AI, not so much in automation, but in coordination.
Yeah, and so, seeing constraints get removed and coordination costs going down in certain areas, and then arising elsewhere, is kind of that reframing that you're talking about. And
that's absolutely right.
Based on our backgrounds, specifically in software and SaaS, we are particularly interested in how the software development lifecycle is going to change, should change. Now that execution is starting to become free, right? Mm-hmm. And you're hearing a lot about this with vibe coding, et cetera. And what are the shifts in the bottlenecks and the constraints and the coordination costs and everything? What should we be paying attention to? Where do you see that going?
Yeah, that's. I think that's another example where we are putting on an automation hat very often, and we're looking at direct substitution. So we keep looking at we see vibe coding as with two hats. We see vibe coding as all software can be created without knowing how to code on one hand, and the other side obviously argues that software engineering is not just about writing code, and it's all about managing the backend systems. It's about creating it with the right architecture and so on. The point is that it's not binary. It's not one or the other on the basis of which we either advocate or dismiss vibe coding. The cost of generating some forms of software, again, the key operative term is some forms. That applies to all of AI, right? That's the jagged frontier, Ethan Mollick's argument. The cost of coding some forms of software is going down, and so you need to understand what that means in terms of a workflow. It could mean a bunch of different things. It could mean that not all the software has to be coded at the same place by the same person, and hence the structure of code in terms of what should be coded with high fidelity versus what can be coded and tested and customized locally could change. So the nature of the relationship between what's coded by a central software company versus by a reseller or a system integrator who would traditionally put in very clunky lines of code on top, but now their relationship could potentially change in terms of what's coded centrally and what's coded externally, and accordingly interfaces can be set up in a way that local customization of software can be done much better. I would say that the nature of software itself is up for question, because traditionally software has been built on the logic of packaged completely an end product sent to a user who doesn't need to know how to code, and hence can just work with the software, giving it natural language instructions or clicking a certain set of boxes. But if end users can now start coding and hence interacting with the software as well, is there a fundamentally new form factor that we need to have in which software is shipped? And does that then reduce the reliance on customer research and product testing if you could create a reasonably horizontal solution which could be vibe coded and customized for yourself by the end user within certain limits? So I think we'll see interesting implications of this come out, but again, all of it will be, to my point, around coordination to really see what should be centrally managed, what should be high fidelity, and what can be locally managed and solve problems locally without breaking the entire system.
That reimagining from first principles is the real opportunity here. And
That's
I think
right.
It's true in software development. I think it's true in most businesses today. So truly understanding the components, understanding the business landscape, and understanding where those opportunities are changing, I think is really the key to your Reshuffle book, and something that I think you've done an amazing job in turning that concept into something that's more accessible for the majority of us to get our heads around how to think differently in this world that is very confusing for most of us at this moment. So thank you so much for that. I'm not sure how I found you, but I am really grateful that I did. And I'm really grateful that you were able to come on the Meg and Amy show and help us understand how you're seeing this, because you've spent a good amount of time turning this into something we can all get our heads around. And that is pretty impressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks so much, Sangeet. It's been a real blessing. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the kind words. Been a pleasure.
Are we ready for Leadership Corner?
Oh yeah, let's do a good Leadership Corner.
Okay, so here's the question. My board is expecting me to drive an AI transformation and expects a 30% cost reduction. We've had several conversations with my leadership team, but it seems that nothing is happening, only excuses. How do I help the team see the urgency and get in with me on this journey?
This is the part about most transformations that if things are hard, you will encounter this moment where you've spent your time, you've said, hey, we're going to do this, everybody nods, and then time passes and you realize that either people don't understand or they don't care or they actively are working against what it is you want to do and sort of going back to the way that they understand and what they're doing day to day. So I think usually when this happens, there's a couple specific gaps, and I think I would start there. The first is making sure that there's clarity of the expectation and clarity of the measurement of that expectation. So it sounds like the 30% is something that you as a leader are holding, but that nobody that is on your extended team feels connected to or compelled to drive. And so I think I would start there and really ground the team in what the current benchmark is and where it needs to change. And generally, I would be inclined to make concrete for people what that 30% means to them in what they would be expected to do if they weren't going the AI route, right? How they would be expected to come up with that 30% in another way, AI or not. So really just help get people really concrete on what is the scale that you're looking for with 30%, and what is the expectation of how you're going to progress towards that 30%. So making it real, making it concrete, making it something that everybody has skin in the game, not just on the number, but the execution plan towards the number really matters. And this is true for any transformation. This doesn't necessarily have anything specific with AI. And then I would start thinking about what are the control points that you can put into place so that you can start identifying how and where progress is happening, so that people can start to see the pattern and start to see the value for themselves. Because until it becomes real to their business, it's just words and it's just targets that they don't feel really matters to their own success. So you got to connect them to your success. You got to get a path together that they co-create with you to get to that. And you have to start having regular check-ins on how those things are progressing. The other thing that tends to become a barrier when it's something that requires a new skill or a new way to do work is oftentimes people really were not part of the design of their work to begin with. And so telling them that it needs to change magically and produce a 30% benefit is often not concrete enough for them. So you probably need some kind of working group or some kind of front runner group to drive the expectations of the programs that are going to deliver those results, so that you're not leaving that too far out afield for people and that it's not too abstract. So again, I'm on record of being against just doing AI for AI's sake or having AI parties or whatever. Those are fine, but those are not going to move the needle. You need to get really specific about what programs you're going to put in place, what targets you're going to put in place, and what expectations you're going to drive for how you're going to measure people and their success. Until you have those things, all you're doing is talking.
Woo. All right. So a couple things to add. So first off, of course, people need to know why. And I would hope that the why is something much bigger and better than a 30% cost reduction, because that is not motivating to people. Like the only motivation is some sort of fear-based motivation, and that's no fun at all. So, I would hope that there is a bigger why in there in terms of what you're really trying to accomplish as a business, as an organization, et cetera. Like what is that big picture? Because, when we were talking to Sangeet earlier, for example, and Usman before, just, doing AI stuff is actually worse than doing no AI stuff, because it's going to distract you. It's going to create this anesthesia, et cetera. So you have to really know what is the target. And that is also a way to motivate people. And that really should be connected into their personal why, right? Why should they care? Like what are their incentives? How is this going to make customers happier and not complain, for example, right? Like that is a personal motivation. And then the last thing I think, with any transformation and any big ask is, like what else is changing? What are they expected not to do? What is this taking the place of, right? Because it's going to feel like extra work, even if it is, the whole idea is to ease work and make things more efficient. At first, it feels like more work. So what is the other work that's going to slow down a little bit or be deprioritized so that they can focus on this work and deliver the results?
I think we nailed it.
Cool. All right.
Are you sad that you're not driving this kind of transformation yourself these days, Amy?
Yes and no. Yes and no. All right. So we had Sangeet, which was fantastic. As we shared, we really loved this book. I learned so much from it. And he really laid out, an incredible theory with real life examples and this theory of, what organizations are really going to need to do to reinvent themselves in this AI era. But like practically speaking, Meg, as an amazing business leader, like what would you recommend to people? Like how should they take all of these learnings forward and act upon them?
So the first is back to like the motivation side of the puzzle. I think one of the reasons I was so drawn to this book is that Sangeet does a beautiful job laying out why there is an unrealized opportunity here, and how there is this moment where there's a chance to change not just the way that you do your work today or the way that you serve your customers today, but to change the entire context of your business. And so I personally find that really like it creates an opportunity for innovation and possibility, capture that is something that we always yearn for, but doesn't always exist in our businesses. And so I think the first thing I would do is to really invest, as we discussed with some of our guests like John Wookie, invest in your strategy. Think about why are you in business and what are the things that your customers find valuable from you, and what kind of relationships have you built that give you the right to win against a new context. And then I would say also invest in looking at the macros, looking at where are the things changing that create opportunity for you to either expand what you do, maybe even take on a new type of adjacency into the current market that you're in. Because I think that we all can see that there's like possibilities out there that are going to be emerging over time. And so really being able to get better at your own systems thinking and your own strategy alignment so that you can capture these things. I think these are things that are going to be investments that pay off over the long period. And then in the short term, I fully agree with the general path that people are going on today, which is, hey, look at your business today and ask yourselves, is there new ways to deliver what you deliver today more efficiently? So in the actions that you take to drive efficiencies and to drive progress with your AI transformations, making sure that you also have that sort of macro strategy view so that you can start to really capture new points of value. That creates an opportunity for your business to grow as opposed to just focusing on cost reduction, which I think is something we all are hopeful for.
So you need to think about all the things.
All the things. But you can also tap into new sources of insight and thinking, as opposed to having to do it all yourself. And so I think this is an opportunity for boards, for leadership teams, for individual leaders to really ask themselves, do I have access to big thinkers? Am I listening to the Meg and Amy show and all their amazing guests? And how am I able to tap into those sources that are going to help me see what's coming around the corner?
That was a pretty great plug, Meg.
Yeah,
it was super natural, just like a used car salesman.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, let's sign off. Please send your Leadership Corner questions in and spread the word. Please comment. We'd love to hear from you.
We thank you so much for helping us start this podcast and helping it thrive. If you have guest ideas, if you have Leadership Corner ideas, if you have suggestions or recommendations or just things you're curious about, don't hesitate to let us know, because we're very interested in expanding the conversation. Let's invent the future together, everyone. I believe in us.
Let's make every day count.